And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is our power rankings for Week 10 of the MLR 2023 season. It has been an exciting week. A lot of interesting outcomes this week. I'll be honest with you guys. This is the first week of this season where it really took me a moment, and I'm not saying that I don't put a lot of thought into my power rankings, but it took a moment to really think about where certain teams were going to be this week, because there were a lot of, not necessarily upsets, but a couple of games that didn't turn out the way that I thought, and games where, there were some really gutsy performances from the quote-unquote underdog teams, and it really made me think, does this team deserve to stay where they are, or maybe they should move a little bit? Because also, too, it really does depend on who's around you, what teams are winning, what teams are losing. So it was a very hard week. Very challenging week for me for this week's power rankings, and it was a lot of shakeup. So I'm really interested to see what you guys, the rugby fans and the fans of my channel, think about these power rankings. And as always, I love to hear your comments and see comparatively where you feel what your power rankings are and where the teams should be throughout the week. So let's start, because we got a lot to discuss this week. Every team played this week, which also I feel kind of contributes to the moving ups and downs. Let's start, first of all, with our team that's on the bottom, who really did put in, for at least the first 50 minutes of the game, kind of a gutsy performance, but still winless this week. The Toronto Arrows, your team of the North, sitting at the number 12 spot. They had a really big challenge this week, facing off against one of the top teams of the MLR this season. They are two-time MLR champions, the Seattle Seawolves, losing to them 27-36. I'll be honest, again, like I said, for the first 50 minutes of the game, Toronto looked very dominant. Travel is a bit hard for our MLR teams, so Seattle was going over to Toronto for this game, to York's Lion Stadium. And man, from the start, after one try from Seattle, 13 unanswered points by the Toronto Arrows, including an odd try where the starting kickoff from the Toronto team bounced oddly. The Seattle players were a little taken by surprise, and the Toronto player, Ross Brody, who was phenomenal in this game, had a brace in this game, was able to get the bounce, get the catch, and easily scored a try. But man, Toronto was up 20-14 going into the half, and looking like they might pull off the upset to beat Seattle. Unfortunately, then there was a yellow card for Toronto for a high tackle, and then Rickard Hatting, one of the best players in Major League Rugby, one of my top players from last season, was able to get his second try of the game and pretty much put the game away for Seattle. Toronto did score a odd penalty try at the very end of the game that made the game a lot closer than it looked on paper. So there was a moment I was feeling moving Toronto up, but in the end, Toronto kind of collapsed at the end, and Seattle, they did squeak out of Toronto with the win. But, an interesting performance by Toronto, and really, this is where Toronto was starting to look kind of like they played better at home. They manhandled, it wasn't Rugby New York, but it was Rugby New York. They beat Rugby New York really badly in Toronto, though. Now that looks, as we look at it, it looked more like New York has been limping along in the season so far. But Toronto does play a lot better when they're at home. Almost pull off the upset, but not enough to move them from the number 12 spot. Now, the next two teams This is where I kind of went back and forth. And in the end, I decided, even though both teams lost, to switch them. And I moved the Chicago Hounds from 10 to 11. And I moved up the Dallas Shackles from 11 to 10, despite the fact that both teams lost. Now, going over the games. Chicago ended up losing to NOLA 37 to 24, while Dallas had a bigger task facing, in my power rankings, the #1 team in the league, the San Diego Legion, and losing 38 to 47. Now, both very close games, but let's look at the actual performances. Chicago, man, just again, with all the talent that Chicago has, they have been, and I'm just going to be brutally honest with this because I was really excited for the Chicago team. You took the best players from two really dominant teams in the last couple of seasons, the Austin Gilgronis and the LA Guiltinis, and you pretty much put them together as a super team. But man, they have been underperforming this entire season. And it really is just the little things. Their set plays, their lineouts, horrible. Their missed tackles. They had, in the first half, 28 missed tackles. I mean, that's an astounding number. Usually, if you have at least double-digit missed tackles, you're already pretty bad. 28, though, in just the first half is phenomenal. It's just astounding how many missed tackles they are. There is definitely a defensive issue in Chicago. As I said, from the start of the season, most of the tries that were scored by Chicago opponents looked almost like they were walk-ins. Like, literally nobody is on these players that are scoring. And half of the time, the Chicago players are looking at each other going, well, why aren't you tackling this guy? So there is definitely a defensive issue in Chicago. And, I mean, there was a moment where Chicago was starting to shine. There was a beautiful try by new acquisition, Matai Luda, who is a former Houston SaberCats player, former USA Sevens player. But, man, just NOLA put this game away. And really, it felt more that Chicago beat themselves than NOLA beating them. Though there is a shout-out to one of the best players so far that's been having a great season, NOLA's scrum half, Rodney Iona, or fly half, Rodney Iona, 6 for 6, perfect off the tee, 14 points by himself. NOLA, honestly, again, not the best performance, but enough to put away Chicago. But really, I felt Chicago beat themselves. And because of that, I slid them back because then in the Dallas game, Dallas really, really looked like a team that was on the verge of beating the best team on my power rankings, the San Diego Legion. They got the score really, really close in this game. And because of 2 tries by Tommy Milanos, who, my God, he was my player of the match. Even though Dallas didn't win, Tommy Milanos for Dallas was the player of the game because, man, that guy has feet. He has footwork like a cha-cha dancer. His first try, if you watch it, it was one of my tries of the week. Again, he out-juked Mikey Teo. Like, he broke Mikey Teo's ankles. It was amazing how he scored that try. His second try, almost as good. But, man, Tommy Milanos coming in for the Dallas Jackals, very impressive game. Nate Osberger on the side of San Diego. I'll talk a little bit more about him when I talk about San Diego. Had a hell of a game as well. He has been, in my opinion, probably the player of the half for the first half of the season. Doing a really great job for San Diego. Again, at the half, Dallas tied the game 19-19. And then, unfortunately, in the second half, San Diego kind of pulled away. 3 tries, including a penalty try. Dallas got within 2 points, though, with scoring a couple tries in the last 10 minutes. But then there was this weird missed kickoff, and unfortunately, Tion Lutz for San Diego scored the winning try to put the game away. Another heartbreak loss for Dallas, but enough that I felt Dallas should move up because their performance, and again, these power rankings are based purely on performance, what you do on the pitch, not necessarily your record. I felt that Dallas did enough to pull up. Chicago did enough to back down a spot. So that was one of the decisions that really I kind of had to take a moment to kind of look at. With that being said, already mentioned before, we'll talk about the number 9 team who beat the Chicago Hounds, Nolo Gold, staying at the number 9 spot just because, again, I didn't feel their performance was that impressive beating Chicago. If anything, I felt more Chicago helped themselves lose. So Nola stays down at the number 9 spot, even though they did pull off the victory over Chicago, 37-24. Next team, man, again, another team that has just been struggling this entire season that has shocked me because I really felt that they were going to make a repeat appearance in the MLR finals. I don't think they're going to be able to defend their title, but the Rugby New York Ironworkers, unfortunately, losing to the Houston SaberCats, but because of the performances of the bottom 4 teams, they don't move a spot, they don't go up a spot, they stay at the number 8. But man, New York, as I mentioned before, the Major League Rugby season, as most rugby seasons, is a season of attrition. The stat that was talked about on the game, 13 of 37 roster players for Rugby New York Ironworkers are currently on the injury list. New York is limping badly through this half of the season, and it's only the halfway point. So the losses mentioned before about Toronto, losing to Toronto in Toronto, thought maybe it was because Toronto played better in Toronto. It might be, but it really was because New York has just been dealing with so many injuries. And it's good players. It's Jack Hyten's out. Ed Fido, who was the top try scorer last year, is out. There are a lot of hurt players on the Rugby New York team, and it's really, really hurting them bad. Forgot to mention, in the New York game and the Dallas game, two of 3 games where, oddly enough, the ball and the tee fell off due to wind, and that totally spooked the fly half that had to kick it, so he wasn't able to make the conversion. But oddly enough, there are 3 games like that this week where the ball fell off the tee, and the fly half wasn't able to react to it quickly enough, so there was no conversion or penalty kick at that point. Going back, though, this game, Houston versus New York, a really dominant performance by Houston, so I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'll talk more when we get to the Houston side. But New York, unfortunately, struggling again this season right now, losing 27-34 to Houston. Moving down 2 spots, Rugby Atlanta losing to the New England Free Jacks, 23-13. Rugby Atlanta, honestly, is again another team that's kind of suffering quite a bit. Doesn't help that it looks like their talented fly half, Duncan Van Skalvik, unfortunately might be injured, seriously injured. He had to be taken off of the field. He was limping, so hopefully he's good. Prayers to him. Hopefully he'll feel better. In the game, New England was pretty dominant. Really nothing to say too much about Atlanta's performance. In the end, there were 23 unanswered points by New England, so we'll talk a little bit more about this game when we talk about New England. But Rugby Atlanta slides down a couple of spots with that loss. One of the big upsets, though, this week, looking super, super impressive going into this week, unfortunately, just fell really flat. The Utah Warriors losing to Old Glory DC, 22-36, sliding down from the number 2 spot all the way to the number 6 spots. Utah had to fly to DC to play against Old Glory. And man, again, traveling is not easy for the Major League Rugby teams, and Utah looked flat. They looked really like they had serious hangover from the flight. Old Glory scored 3 tries, 1 penalty try within the first 20 minutes. And it just, I mean, Utah was trying to come back, and thankfully to players like Lance Williams, who had a brace, they tried to come back, but it was just too much to overcome for Utah. And in the end, Old Glory with a try by Christopher Newcomer was able to put away Utah. And Utah, unfortunately, it was definitely what I would consider an upset loss. I do feel Old Glory is much better than what they've been this season, But Utah was looking really, really hot going into this game, and they tumbled quite a bit, losing again to Old Glory 22-36. Moving up a spot is the New England Free Jacks, who defeated Rugby411, as I mentioned before, 23-13. Not much to say about this game. Slade McDowell has returned to the New England Free Jacks, so that's really great for New England. It was kind of a back-and-forth game at first, but then 23 unanswered points in the second half by New England pretty much put the game away to New England. Shout out to Leroy Milan, who scored his try. Second game coming back, second try in a row after coming back from a broken thumb. And he's looking pretty good. Good addition for the New England Free Jacks. Moving on, as mentioned before, pulling off the victory over Utah. Moving up 3 spots, biggest jump in the power rankings. Old Glory DC getting that prized elite top 4 position, defeating the Utah Warriors. Really, really great performance. Like I said, it does help having that home field advantage. Utah looked very sluggish coming off the plains, coming down from Utah up to DC. But DC capitalized on that, winning the game 36-22. Going on to number 3, moving up 1 spot after a thrashing over Rugby New York, is the Houston SaberCats, winning that game, as I mentioned before, 34-27. A great performance by Houston, who is looking very, very good this season. Little bit of an issue during the game. It kind of made a lot of headlines when the head coach of Houston SaberCats, Pote Human, was in a slap fest with the strength and conditioning coach of Rugby New York. Still don't know what caused it, but I mean, they showed it. If you watch the game, going through their hydration break, Coach Human Poton Human, for whatever reason, slaps the assistant strength and conditioning coach, and the strength and conditioning coach then threw a blow at head coach Human. And man, it was something you don't see too often in sports. Both coaches have been given a 6-week suspension, and hopefully that will be the end of that. But Houston has been having some issues behind the coaching staff. Pote Human getting the suspension a couple weeks earlier, never really explained, but somehow the GM of Houston got suspended for a week for what supposedly the rumors are a little bit of tampering with players that they're trying to recruit. Don't know if that's true because it's only rumors, and I don't like to report rumors on on this site. But Houston has been having some issues behind the scenes. On the pitch, though, they are looking impressive. Another great win for them, moving up 1 spot to number 3. Also moving up a spot, the two-time Major League Rugby champions, the Seattle Seawolves. As I mentioned before, great performance over the Toronto Arrows, 36-27. Was a little sluggish at first, but Rickard Hadding was able to lead the troops. He got a brace in that game. Ejala Timu, amazing player, kicking off the tee, and Seattle was able to get away from Toronto with the win, 36-27. And of course, very close game, but not enough to have them slide anywhere. San Diego Legion hold steady at number 1, defeating the Dallas Jackals 47-38. Close game, though. I gave Dallas a little bit of credit for that, but San Diego still sits as one of the, if not the elite team in my power rankings. So, those are my power rankings. Again, we're still looking at a very, very competitive Western Conference. San Diego, Seattle, Houston, all vying for a playoff spot. Utah kind of fell out of it. Hopefully Utah will find some traction or at least some sort of consistency, because right now what's separating these 4 teams is the fact that these 3 have been consistent. Utah is starting to look like the Utah of last year, where they were very, very streaky. Old Glory and New England on the Eastern Conference side battling out for that top position. Rugby411 slowly creeping their way in. New York, man, I don't know. And NOLA is also struggling with them as well. And then, of course, you have your 3 that have been pretty much consistently on the bottom of the rankings and their respective conferences. So, those are my power rankings. Again, a lot of mixing around going on, especially with Utah dropping and then a little mixing here. Let me know what you think with your opinion of your power rankings. And then let's move on now to our Rugby Super Brew MLR, Rugby411 Super Brew MLR Pick'ems. Interesting week this week. Bam! And congratulations, Mr. Rugby, getting the yellow cap. 11.5 points this week. He is the only player to get every team prediction correct. 6 for 6. Congratulations, Mr. Rugby. Very, very impressive performance this week, my friend. He sits on top of this week's leaderboard with 11.5. Coming in second, John Hawkins, 8 points. James A6117 with third place with 7.33 points. And then Harry and myself rounding out the top 5 with 7 points. First time for me. It took 10 weeks, but first time for me to finish within the top 5. I'm very proud of that. Unfortunately, at the very bottom, Pissing Man coming in with 4 points. And now let's look at the overall leaderboard. Bam! MSDRFC 83, Matt still sits at the top. 65.83 points, but SD Cal guy still right on his tail, 63.83 points, only 2 points separating the two of them. And then right behind them, John Hawkins, who had a great performance this week, is at 61.33. Harry, who also had a great performance, goes up a spot to 4th place with 60.66 points. And then Jahaigo, unfortunately, drops 2 spots to the number 5 with only 60.49. So he's less than 2/10 of a point behind Harry. So again, top 5, there's only less than 5 points. Actually, it's about 5 points separating the top 1 from the top 5. So literally, guys, 1 week could make a difference in these rankings. So as always, make sure, guys, put in your picks. A little preview of my preview video. There is a game on Friday. I know I'm filming this Thursday. Work got kind of in the way, so this video is coming a little bit later than usual. But Friday is the first game, so make sure you get your picks in. Don't miss out, because every game, every prediction matters. And again, always let me know what you think about my power rankings. Let me know what you think of this video. And as always, I love your guys' support. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the pitch.